This is the 5th class in this series of laws of Shabbat, and today the class is dedicated for Refuah Shlema Aviel ben Rina, Denis Daniel ben Leah, Netanel ben Angela, Eli ben Shura, Shura bat Frecho, Bechor ben Ksio, and the last name? Whoever it is, Ben Yulish. Everyone should have Refuah Shlema. Today we are going to cover a few of the melachot, a few of the forbidden labors on Shabbat. Today we will start learning about cutting. Normally, it is forbidden to cut something to size. If I want to cut a piece of wood to a specific size, I'm not allowed, whether I'm doing it with a saw or a knife. If I want to cut a piece of paper with scissors or with a knife to a specific size, I'm not allowed. It's a Torah prohibition to cut an object to a specific size. However, that is only for objects that are not food. But if I want to cut, let's say, cake, and I want to cut each piece to a specific size, let's say I have a family of 8 people and I want to cut the cake into 8 slices, that's not a problem. I'm allowed to cut cake in equal sizes. I'm allowed to cut vegetables. I'm allowed to cut fruit or bread, challah, to specific sizes, equal pieces. Now, we have a rabbinic prohibition where I'm not using an instrument, but I'm using my hands. For example, the famous example, I'm cutting toilet paper, a long perforation. This is rabbinic because I'm not using a tool, and I'm not creating something permanent. I'm cutting the paper to size, and I'm going to throw it out immediately. So it's nevertheless forbidden, but since it is rabbinic, we allow it if there is no other paper available. We allow to cut napkin or paper, not a long perforation. And if you need to cut it a long perforation, then you should do it in an unusual way. For example, don't hold it with 2 hands. Hold it with just 1 hand, and the other side hold with your elbow. And for example, if you personally in your house have tissues or you have pre-cut toilet paper, that's fine. But you visit a friend or a relative, or you go to a synagogue and they forgot, they don't have tissues, they don't have pre-cut, and they have just regular roll. So we say when we're dealing with rabbinic prohibitions, you're allowed to do it nevertheless if it is for honor of people. When we're dealing with not causing people to be embarrassed, we are allowed to break a rabbinic prohibition. Because it was built into the rabbinic prohibition, normally you have to keep it, but if it's going to cause embarrassment, or in some cases it's going to cause suffering, then you can be lenient. And this is an example where if you don't use it, it's going to be embarrassing, and therefore we permit it. So with objects, you're not supposed to cut to size. With food, you're allowed to cut to size. And therefore, if, let's say, you have a cracker that has a perforation in the middle, and you can crack it exactly in half, that would be permitted for food. Now, what if I want to not cut to size, but I want to measure specific size? For example, I want to use a measuring cup, or I want to use a dropper, or a tape measure to cut a specific amount of a vegetable or a specific amount of pastry. Is that permitted? So even though we allow you to cut to a specific size in food, but you're not allowed to use instruments that are used to measure specifically. And therefore, we cannot use a measuring cup on Shabbat. And we cannot use any other instrument that measures precisely. The only exception is if you need that food for a mitzvah. For example, if you want to make sure, am I drinking enough wine or grape juice for the Pesach Seder? So then I'm allowed to put it into a measuring cup and see, because it's for a mitzvah. Or you want to know, am I eating enough challah to fulfill mitzvah of eating in a sukkah? Or am I eating enough matzah by the Pesach Seder? So they actually sell scale that is mechanical in Jewish stores, so that you can actually use it on Shabbat and Yom Tov to measure your maror lettuce on Pesach, or to measure your matzah, and measuring cups that measure 3 ounces of grape juice or wine. Similarly, if you have a sick person at home and you have a manual thermometer, meaning not electronic, the mercury or the alcohol thermometer, normally I'm not supposed to measure temperature. But if somebody is sick, then I'm allowed to measure his, if he has fever, so that I can give him proper dose of the medicine. Just after you use it, don't shake it, because then you're preparing it for future and you might not need it. If you happen to need it again, second time on Shabbat, you can shake it and measure it second time. Similarly, if you have food cooking on Shabbat, you should not use food thermometer to measure the temperature. Some pots, fancy pots, they have a cover with a thermometer built into the cover. So you can use that pot, but just make sure not to specifically look at the thermometer, because that would not be permitted. Another example where it would be permitted is if you need to make a formula for a baby. Since the formula has to be specific, you cannot put too much formula. Therefore, since babies are considered sick, because if you don't feed them, they're very fragile, they're delicate, they might get sick if you don't take proper care. So if you give them food or medicine, you can use a measuring cup. But it's advisable not to measure precisely on the line and check with your eyes that it should be precise. Just try to approximate. If it's a little bit more, a little bit less, that's fine. Now, just quickly, what is the reason we cannot measure food? It's not because of cutting to size, that is a Torah prohibition, but rather it's a rabbinic prohibition related to commerce. Rabbinically, we're not allowed to do business on Shabbat. We're not allowed to buy and sell on Shabbat. According to Torah, it is permitted to go to a local grocery, give them money, and take food. But the rabbis forbade it. That the markets should operate, or stores, or even privately. I cannot come to a friend or a neighbor and say, I'm out of flour, can I please buy it from you? Not only buying is not allowed rabbinically, but even borrowing. You should not come to your friend and say, can you please lend me some flour? Can you, or flour, not a Shabbat example, but can you lend me some sugar? Can you lend me a bottle of milk?
Or you can say, can I get some?
You can say, can I please have? Can you please give me? Yes. Can I please have? Because when you use the language of borrowing or lending, it's considered a business transaction. And we're not allowed to do business on Shabbat rabbinically. What is the concern? And the reason why it's forbidden is because usually after each business transaction, you write either a contract or a receipt. And writing is forbidden according to Torah. Therefore, the rabbi said, don't do any business transactions on Shabbat, that it shouldn't lead to writing. And we know, whenever you buy in a store, they give you a receipt, they print it out. Or in olden times, they would keep a record, how much the business made, what did they sell, how much of in the stock. Or if somebody cannot pay, they would write in a note that such and such person owes us money. So business transactions involve writing. And therefore, whether it is buying, whether it is borrowing, or even handling money, once we forbid business, now there is no use for money on Shabbat, and therefore money becomes muktzeh. Whether it's coins or bills or credit cards or checkbook, all of that becomes muktzeh. We cannot handle it, we cannot move it.
Isn't it because it's considered to be work, or it's not considered?
Not because it's considered work. According to Torah, only the 39 specific labors are forbidden, like building, cutting to size, writing, painting, and baking, cooking, harvesting. These are examples of forbidden labors. Otherwise, we are allowed to do work on Shabbat. For example, we know that you can hire a babysitter to come to your house and babysit. You can hire a waiter, a Jewish waiter, to, whether it's in a restaurant or at home, a private party. How can they work? You can hire someone to take care of an elderly person. The rabbi is hired to teach or to pray on Shabbat for the congregation. So you are allowed to work on Shabbat. You just have to know how to arrange it, that it shouldn't be doing business on Shabbat or earning money on Shabbat, paying a worker on Shabbat. In order to avoid it, we don't pay specifically per hour for Shabbat work, but rather we include it into a weekly paycheck. So it's as if we're telling the worker, I'm going to pay you for the whole week, not for Shabbat. And it's as if I'm paying him more for weekdays and I'm not paying him for Shabbat. And therefore, if somebody wants to work as a mashgiach in a restaurant that's open on Shabbat because they have a yoshvo or sheva brachot, he's allowed to do it, but we don't pay him for the work he does on Shabbat, but rather he comes Friday to make sure everything's okay, and for that 1 hour that he comes on Friday, we pay him for the whole day. But we're just paying him for Friday. Shabbat, it's as if he works for free. And therefore, technically, according to Torah, you can do business, but rabbinically, you're not allowed to.
Can I ask you about the Torah? Like, why are we allowed to bid on the Torah? Yes.
So that's a good question. If doing business on Shabbat is forbidden rabbinically, and not only that, once you're not allowed to do business on Shabbat, whatever you're not allowed to do, you're not allowed to talk about. So if we cannot do business, we cannot talk about business. We cannot talk about money. So how can we, in the synagogue, on Shabbat, in front of Aron HaKodesh, speak about money? And the answer is that since speaking about money and doing business is forbidden only rabbinically, the rabbis made specific rules that under certain circumstances to allow you to do that. And that is, just like we said, the rabbis forbade you to ask a non-Jew to do work for you on Shabbat, so too the rabbis permitted you to ask a non-Jew if you need it for communal mitzvah. So the same thing here. You're not allowed to do business, and you're not allowed to speak about business and about money on Shabbat. But if it involves a mitzvah, you're allowed to. And the reason is because they said, since many people come to synagogue on Shabbat, if we don't allow it on Shabbat, then the communal matters will not be taken care of. Because during the weekday, everybody is busy in the fields, at the job site, and you wouldn't be able to discuss it, you wouldn't be able to get commitments from people. And therefore, anything that relates to a mitzvah or anything that relates to communal work, you're allowed to speak about on Shabbat, if there is no other opportunity during the week. So therefore, let's say you have a synagogue board of directors, and they're busy, they cannot meet on weekday, they can get together on Shabbat and speak about what programs to do in a synagogue, who to hire, and so on, even what to build and other programs on Shabbat, because it's for community. And therefore, it's perfectly permitted to sell aliyot, and it's permitted to bid. It's not considered a sin. The opposite, it's a mitzvah.
So, in a situation, say I have a non-Jewish store next to my house, and on Shabbat, let's say I forgot that I don't have water or whatever. And
Yes.
he knows that I come to him, he knows that
Excellent question.
I water, and after Shabbat I come and pay.
Since Jewish people are not allowed to keep their stores open on Shabbat, but we're allowed to go to a neighbor, a Jew or non-Jew, and we can ask them for food or cups, plasticware, as long as we don't mention money and borrowing. Similarly, I can go to a non-Jewish store that they know and trust me, and without mentioning price and without mentioning weight, I can tell them, can I take this? And he knows, yes, you informed him, and he knows that after Shabbat you're going to come and pay. That's permitted. And in fact, they do that in Jewish neighborhoods where they have non-Jewish stores, like on Main Street. There is a liquor store that's open on Shabbat, so if anybody needs, they stand by the storefront and they wave to the owner, because they cannot come in. There's an alarm system that rings when any customer walks in. So they wave, the non-Jew comes out, and they tell them, I need a bottle of this and that. He brings it out to them, and that's it. Then the non-Jew goes back into the store. He writes down for himself who took what, and after Shabbat, they go in and they pay them.
So they're familiar with halachot. You ask you for your phone number, your information, right?
They can ask you for information, because as far as you're concerned, you don't want them to write it down. They're writing it down for themselves to remember. They're not doing it for you. So that's fine. They're allowed to write it down because they're only doing it for themselves. If they could remember everyone's names and what they bought, they would do it. Just for their own convenience, for their own benefit, they're writing it down. So therefore, as long as you inform the non-Jew that you are going to do that, and they know you and they trust you, and you don't mention money and you don't mention weight, like I need a pound of this, I need a dozen of that, I need a gallon of that, you don't mention weight or measure, and you don't mention price, you can ask in a non-Jewish store for food or items and bring them home.
You can say, oh, I'll pay you later.
Don't say, I'll pay you later, because then it turns into a business transaction. And by the way, that is one of the reasons why we're allowed to carry on Yom Tov. Since on Yom Tov we are allowed to cook food, prepare food, part of food preparation is bringing food from the market. And in order to bring food from the market, I have to carry, even if there is no eruv. And therefore, we're allowed to carry on Yom Tov even without eruv, if I need it for Yom Tov.
But I have a question. If this is in a Jewish neighborhood and they see you going into a store,
If it is a Jewish neighborhood,
yeah,
that's fine. Since what you're doing is permitted, then the laws of Marit don't apply. That if they would know the halacha, they wouldn't suspect that you're doing something wrong. So the fact that they're suspecting is just out of ignorance. And we don't worry about Marit Ha'ayin for ignorant people. If a normal person who knows halacha will still make a mistake, then you're not allowed to do it. For example, before we had almond and rice milk, if somebody sees you that you're drinking some white liquid together with your meat meal, they would suspect that it is milk, any normal person, because there's no other option. But now that we have almond milk and rice milk, it's more lenient. But at that time, you know halacha, you're not allowed to mix, and every normal person would suspect you. So at that time, you were not allowed to drink almond milk with your meat meal without putting some kind of a reminder for people, like a carton of almond milk in front of you, that people should see, oh, that's what he is drinking. But if they just don't know the law, and that is why they are suspecting you, then it's not your problem. Okay, now going to the next topic, that is dash in Hebrew, which means threshing. Threshing. After you harvest grain, the grain grows on a stalk, and you have to separate the stalk, the kernel, from the rest of the stalk, the chaff. So how do you do that? You apply pressure and movement, friction to the stalk, and that separates the chaff from the kernel. They sell something like that for garlic. It's a rubber pipe. You put a few garlics in there, and you rub it. And the rubber pipe pulls on the peels of the rubber, and after a few movements, the peel of the garlic falls off, and the garlic falls out clean. Yeah, that you cannot use on Shabbat, right? But you can. This is an example of dash, where you apply pressure and movement, and with that you separate the shell from the kernel. So that is prohibited according to Torah on Shabbat. Therefore, if I have food that is in a shell, I cannot apply pressure and rub it with my hands or with any other utensil to extract the kernels. For example, if I have peanuts. Peanuts is an example where you have kernels inside the shell. So I cannot take a peanut and go like this with my hands to break it. The only way I can do it is with my fingertips, one at a time. Some people do that. Or you can put it on the table and roll it. So that would not be allowed on Shabbat. Only on
on the table is allowed?
No. Only with fingertips, one at a time. You take a peanut, you break it, you take the kernel, you eat it. Similarly with pistachios, I can break one at a time and eat, but I cannot put a few and go like that, or with a plate or another instrument and apply pressure. Or example we brought with garlic. I cannot do it. I have to peel it by hand, one at a time.
Does it consider the same thing with eggs, or?
Oh, this is a big problem.
N-
I mean, for me, I don't know how to do it.
No, eggs this is only for things that grow on the ground.
Oh, it's one of the things that go on
And one more example is green peas that are still in the pod. If you go in such motion with your whole palm, pressing one palm against another, that is not allowed. But you can again split it with your fingertips one at a time. That is fine.
What about if you take it in your mouth and you're squeezing them all out at the same
In the mouth, everything is permitted. Most things that you're not allowed to do with your hands, you can do it with your mouth because that is considered normal way of eating. Whether you want to separate a pit or suck out the juice from a fruit, you cannot do it with your hands, but you can do it with your mouth. And here also, for example, I can take a seed like sunflower seed, and I could break it with my mouth, or I can break it with my hands. But if I'm using a utensil to crack a nut, for example, a walnut or an almond, I can use the utensil, but I can only crack one nut at a time and eat it. I cannot make a collection, crack a few of them, have a collection, and then eat.
Only because I'm using a tool.
Because you're using a tool and it looks like you're saving it for future. You're making a whole pile.
But if you know you're going to eat that.
Even if you know. Take one, give it to your child. Take one, put it in your mouth, and then you can continue cracking the nuts.
But for the peanuts, since I'm doing it with my hands, I can do a whole bunch.
Yes. If you're doing it with your fingertips, there is no prohibition. You can collect a few, as long as you're planning to eat them soon after. But if you're using a utensil like a what is it called, a nut cracker, then you can only crack one at a time and eat it. Now we're going to the next melacha that is called zoreh. Zoreh means that after I crush the stalks and I separate the chaff from the kernel, now it's all mixed. I have to separate it. How do I remove the chaff? They would take a shovel, throw the whole mixture of kernels and chaff into the air. The wind would come, blow, and the chaff, since it's light, it would be removed, blown away by the wind, and the kernels would fall back down. And they would do it many times until it's only kernels left. So similarly, we cannot, let's say you crush a walnut and then there are little pieces mixed together with the nut. I cannot take it on my hand and blow on it to let the light pieces fly away. Or with pistachios also, you have some little pieces, I cannot blow on it. Or after peeling garlic or onion, if I have little thin membranes and shells, I cannot blow on it, because this is similar to using wind to separate good from bad. So what is the way to do it? What I can do is I can take it into my hand and I can just throw it up and down. Not even from one hand to another. One hand to another, that is not allowed. Without blowing. The only permitted way is just to throw it up and allow the shells to fall by themselves, fly off, and let the nuts fall in my hand.
Why not just take the...
For sure. Another option, yes, another option is to actually take out the good from the mixture.
Okay.
What do you mean? How do you do that?
You have
What
the
if it's
peanut.
stuck on the peanut, right?
Yeah, if it's stuck, you just take it with two hands and you separate it.
Don't blow on it.
Right, you just cannot use wind to separate good from bad.
You were saying you're not allowed to take it off.
You're allowed to take it off with your finger, but once it's separate, you cannot blow on it that the shell should fly away.
But you're taking only the good part.
Okay, now something connected to this is, can I use a spray? Any spray, whether it is deodorant, whether it is oil, or
Is the answer yes? No.
or water. Let's say you're hot on a summer day and you just want to spray some water on your face. Can I take a water sprayer and spray it? Or I'm using the power of the propellant or the gas inside, or this mechanism to spray water or other liquid.
Wait, is this part of Zorah?
It's something that looks like it. It looks like Zoreh because the wind comes and carries whatever the material is away from you. So can I use a spray that has pressurized air inside, and with that pressure it's going to spray the liquid far away? And the answer is yes. Because I'm not using wind to separate good from bad. I'm just spreading whatever there is a long distance.
So you can spray deodorant?
You can spray deodorant. With deodorant, you have to be careful that it shouldn't go on your clothing. You can spray, whether it's perfume or deodorant, directly on skin, but not on clothing or other objects.
Because it might stain it?
Not because of staining, because there's a separate rabbinic prohibition not to infuse smell into objects, odor into objects. I can apply it to myself, but not to objects.
Why? Like, what's the...
When you apply it to yourself, it's considered temporary. Because soon it's going to dissipate, you're going to wash it off. But when you apply it to clothing, it can stay there for months and years.
Does that apply to hair too? You spray hair, spray on hair, like hairspray?
Yeah, for hair it's permitted, but not on anything that's not your hair. Any accessory or hat or a wig, that wouldn't be permitted.
Only natural hair?
Or only natural hair, because that's your body. Okay, yeah,
Roll-on, like perfume and deodorant is not allowed?
that's allowed. With deodorants, you can use either spray deodorant or roll-on, because that's liquid. The solid one you cannot use, or gel, only liquid. So the roll-on liquid is permitted.
But you have to be careful not to get on the clothes, right?
Yes, but not on the clothing, yes. Okay, next melacha is called sechita. Sechita means squeezing. Extracting juice from fruits and vegetables. This is a subcategory of dash, what we said, that you apply pressure to separate the kernel from the shell. Here you're applying pressure to the fruit and you're extracting the juice out of it. So depending on what kind of fruit it is, it could be either deoraita or derabanan. If it's a kind of fruit that is regularly or majority of its use is for juice, then it's prohibited according to Torah. And we have two examples of that. One is grapes, since grapes are mainly used for grape juice and wine, more than for food. Majority of grapes in the world are used for wine making and juice. So you cannot squeeze grapes according to Torah. And olives, because majority of olives in the world are grown for olive oil, not for food. And therefore we're not allowed to squeeze olives, fresh olives, for their juice. Olives that are pickled, there is no oil in them anymore because all the oil was extracted for their own use and replaced with brine. Those olives is not, it's not forbidden to squeeze.
So no grapes, no fresh olives. What about lemon?
Now, Next category is rabbinically forbidden, and that is where it's used, the majority of that fruit or vegetable is used for food, but it is also regularly used for juices, but only minority. That is forbidden rabbinically. And that is all the other fruits and vegetables like apples, pears, watermelon, pomegranate, all kinds of berries. Most modern fruits fall into this category that it's rabbinically forbidden to squeeze them. And here, the rabbis allowed us to squeeze them into food. Because only if you want to extract the juice from the fruit, it's forbidden. But if I'm not interested in the juice to drink, I just want to enhance my food, the rabbis allowed it. So I'm allowed to take any fruit and squeeze it.
If you're enhancing the food, not
into the food, right? Not into the liquid, not into an empty cup, and not into a juice, another juice, but into food I'm allowed to. For example, I can take an orange and squeeze it into my salad or onto my fish, but not into an empty cup and not into another juice. Yes?
So then, let's say somebody, a lot of my family members, they have like high blood pressure, they squeeze lemon into a cup and drink it.
So let's go to the next category, and that is the category that is never squeezed for drinking the juice by itself. And one of the main examples is a lemon. Most people, if not 99%, will not squeeze a lemon to drink its juice straight. Rather, they squeeze the lemon to use its juice as an ingredient in other foods or drinks. Therefore, we are allowed to squeeze lemon both into food and drink, but preferably not into empty cup. So therefore, if I want to make lemonade, I don't have to squeeze it onto food, although Ashkenazim are strict and they require that even lemon has to be squeezed into food. So they take sugar and they first squeeze the lemon onto sugar so that the sugar absorbs the lemon, and then they add water to make lemonade. According to Sephardim, that is a preferable way, because this way you will cover all opinions, to squeeze lemon onto sugar first and then add water. But according to us, you are allowed to squeeze lemon into the water directly. So you can recommend your relatives, if they want lemon juice, to first put some water into the cup and then squeeze lemon into that water. That would be permitted.
But that's
Okay.
only,
It's okay if the water is very little?
Yes.
The majority?
Yes, as long as when they start, there is some water in the cup.
that's only for health.
For anybody. If you want something sour, so take a little water, squeeze lemon into it, and drink it.
But you just said you cannot do that.
You cannot do it with other fruits,
But with lemon, you're
but with lemon you're allowed to, because lemon is never used for drinking straight. So therefore it's not considered a drink, it's considered food, because we always add it as an ingredient into other foods.
in terms of breast milk, are we allowed to extract?
So that's a good question. What about breast milk? Breast milk falls under the same category or subcategory of dash, of threshing, that you're extracting milk from its container. And therefore, we shouldn't do it. But since it's only forbidden rabbinically, if it causes pain to a woman, she can do it by hand. Or if she needs to feed the baby and the baby cannot drink directly, then she can also squeeze it either by hand or with manual pump or with an electric pump on a timer. But it is preferable to use electric pump with a timer. So if you know that you need to nurse your baby regularly, let's say every 4 hours. So you set your pump to turn on for every 4 hours for half an hour. Once it's on, you extract the milk, and then the pump turns off by itself. You feed the baby. But otherwise, if the baby doesn't need, you're not allowed to collect the milk. It has to go to waste right away.
So if it's because of pain, you have to throw it out?
Yes, both. If it's because of pain or you just don't want your milk supply to stop, let's say the baby is not hungry, but let's say, chas v'shalom, the baby is not feeling well, and for day 2 just doesn't want to nurse. You don't want your milk supply to stop, so you continue extracting the milk. So on a weekday, you use the pump. What do you do on Shabbat? So either you set up electric pump on a timer, or you use manual pump, but it has to go to waste because your baby doesn't need it right away. And even if...
What if they will need it in like 1 hour or something?
So you pump it then, manually, or you save it for them because they need it.
So you just said that you can't save it.
You cannot save it if you know the baby doesn't need it. Let's say,
A week from now, when you...
yes, let's say you have some milk saved from before, and you know that this milk the baby is not going to need. You're only doing it to protect your milk supply or to relieve the pressure. So it has to go straight to waste, either into a sink or into a container, but you have to put some soap into the container that you attach to the electric pump or to the manual pump. So again, you have 3 options, either by hand or with a manual pump, or preferably with electric pump on a timer, because manually, with a manual pump, you're actually activating the pump every time with your own hand. As opposed to electric pump, you're not doing anything. You're just attaching the suction cups, and it's being done automatically. So there is less involvement, and that is more a preferable way. Next, what's called makeh b'patish. That's another melacha, means finishing touch. Finishing an object. If you have an object that's not quite finished and you just need to fit in the last piece or give it the last hit with a hammer, just do the last step of the process and the utensil is going to be ready, finished. Even though that minute thing by itself is not significant separately, but because you are attaching it to an almost ready product, it becomes significant. So that is forbidden for objects. What about to food? So there is a machloket about food. According to some, you're not allowed to put finishing touch on food, but the halacha follows the opinion that you are allowed to improve food, give the last finishing touches on food on Shabbat. Now, for example, I'm allowed to take almonds that are very dry and I can put them in water for a couple hours and let them absorb the water to moisten them. Even though I made them right now edible, I made them better, I improved them on Shabbat, nevertheless that's permitted. Even if before they were so dry I couldn't eat them, and now I can. The only way that we are not allowed to prepare food is with fire, that's cooking. But other ways of preparing food, for example, the food is very hard and I want to slice it thinly so that I can chew on it, I'm allowed to do it, or moisten it.
What about grating?
Grating. So on Yom Tov you can grate, but on Shabbat not. You can cut with a knife small pieces, but not use a utensil that's designed for mass production.
So you can squeeze garlic.
Right. Garlic also you should cut instead of using the garlic press. That's on Shabbat. On Yom Tov you can use a grater and garlic press. The next,
Rabbi, before
Yeah.
you go on, if let's say a nail is sticking out from the floor, are you allowed to hammer it or you have to cover it with something?
that's a good question. When
Because it happens when you can't touch your hammer on Shabbat.
That's a good question. The question is, if you find a nail sticking out either from a floorboard or furniture or chair, what can you do? So regularly banging a nail or improving something is boneh, which means construction, and we're not allowed to use it. And like it's mentioned, instruments, tools that are used for construction are also muktzeh. So preferably, you should either cover the nail with something, put a chair or a bed or couch over it. If it's a chair, just move it to another room, put an extra pillow on top, and don't bang it in, because that is prohibited either according to Torah, if you're improving the house or improving the chair, or rabbinically if you're not improving it but you just bending it, for example. Eventually, after Shabbat, you'll have to remove it anyway because it's bent, but still better not do it. Now, to address your comment, are you allowed to use a hammer on Shabbat? And that is permitted under certain circumstances. A hammer is allowed to be used on Shabbat for permissible use. For example, if I have a nut and I don't have a nut cracker, so I'm allowed to take a hammer or pliers and crack the nut. But of course, for other uses that hammer is usually used, I cannot use it. And another example of something dangerous is, what if glass breaks on Shabbat? Once the glass once the cup is broken, it has no use. So each individual piece is muktzeh. I cannot just take that piece and say, oh, let me look through it, let me play with it, let me cut something with it. It's muktzeh. However, whenever there is danger, I'm allowed to move muktzeh, because muktzeh is only rabbinic. And I'm allowed to either pick it up with my hands or preferably to move it with a broom. That's not forbidden. And since it's dangerous if glass or if nails spilled on the floor, screws, since it's dangerous, I can sweep them away.
So regardless if it's bare floor or carpet, you can use a broom over it?
If it's bare floor, then don't use a broom. We're not supposed to use the broom on bare floor. It's not so common, right? On Shabbat, bare floor means dirt floor.
Like if I have tiles.
If you have tiles, carpet, or wood, that's not a problem. You can use a broom. No, bare floor is outside.
No.
As long as it's not earth, you can use the broom. Yes. Okay. Now, something that we spoke about is putting out fire on Shabbat. Of course, that is not allowed, whether to raise the flame or lower the flame. And on Yom Tov, the only way to raise the flame or lower the flame is if the food needs it. If the food is burning, I can lower the flame. If the food is not cooking, not boiling, I can raise the flame. But I cannot turn it off, because usually food doesn't need the fire to be turned off. I can just move the food away, move it to another part of the stove that's not on.
I heard that if the food is on the stove, you can turn it off. No?
Only if the food needs it. So the only way I would be allowed to turn the fire off if the food needs it. For example, let's say I'm making some kind of delicate dish that after it's finished, I have to lower the flame, and then after a while I have to turn off the flame, and I cannot touch it until it cools down, let's say. So then, since I cannot move it to another part of the stove, and I need the fire off, so then I would be allowed to. But if I can move it to another place, then I'm not allowed to turn off the fire off. Or if you can imagine a place, an example where there is absolutely no place to move the pot. It finished cooking. Now I want to serve it, and I have no place to put it. So then the only place to keep it is on that part of the stove. I don't have any other place, which is unlikely. Then I would be allowed to turn the fire off because the food needs it. Otherwise it's going to get burned. But that's only on Yom Tov, right? Everything I said so far is only on Yom Tov. For Shabbat we cannot touch the flame, not raise, not lower. Yes.
Let's say I'm making korohan, I need to fry French fries separately, I need to do this separately, then I'm making salads, let's say I'm boiling something separately. I'm not going to keep all three.
So what do you do on Yom Tov if you have too many fires and you don't want so many flames on? So the only way is to take a small pot, fill it up with water, put it open over the fire, let the water boil, spill over, the fire is going to go out, and right after when it goes out, you can turn the knob off. But then you have to use that water for tea or for washing hands, so that you don't cook it for nothing.
I have an expensive stove top, so like it's going to ruin it. When the water goes in, then it doesn't. There's a problem turning it on, and I have issues.
So if you cannot do that, then you cannot turn it off. Right.
If the reasoning is that you're afraid your kids might touch it if it's not on the stove, it's too hot, you know what I mean?
What is not on the stove?
Let's say if you cook the food, right, and then you move it away and you put it on the counter, let's
Yes.
say, if there is a fear that the child might touch it because they're not paying attention, is it okay to then turn it off and leave it on the stove? Or is it
If you can find another place, then no. If you have another part of the stove that's still doesn't have the fire on, then you have to move it there. If you can protect it with the chair or anything else, put it further away from the edge, you have to do that. This is not so practical that you would be able to directly turn the fire off.
What if,
So
climb everywhere?
yeah, what if the kid, there's danger of the kid touching the actual flame? Then what?
you have to chase them out of the kitchen.
Is this rabbinical prohibition or
This is on Yom Tov, it's rabbinical prohibition. Yes. That is why there are some leniencies. But if you have such a problem, you can get a small stovetop, electrical one, and put it on a timer. Whenever you don't need it, it's going to turn off.
Time to cook 3 different meals.
Yeah.
You need 3 different flames.
Yes, yes. Design your life in such a way to prevent these issues. Buy a stove that's not so expensive or has sealed burners or dry it afterwards. You have to figure out your life because this is something you will live with every Yom Tov. So either get a hot plate, get an electric burner. Yes.
What if the flame shuts off while it's on? Can I turn it off or do I?
Yes, whenever the flame goes out, whether Yom Tov or Shabbat, once the flame is not there, I can turn the knob off.
With the regular hand, or do I have to use the Kashina?
If there is no electric lighter, then you can do it regular hand because it's just like turning the faucet off, or the water faucet.
So the idea of transferring from one fire to another is just to turn it on? Not to leave
On-
it on only?
On Yom Tov, we can transfer fire from one to another.
So it's not that you just have to leave one fire on. To keep
If you
that-
started more fires, you cannot turn them off.
Okay.
So many people, what they do is they pre-cook whatever can be pre-cooked before Yom Tov. And either you refrigerate it or you freeze it. And that makes your life easier. On Yom Tov, you can enjoy the holiday that you don't have to stand in the kitchen the whole day. You just take it out from the freezer or refrigerator and just warm it up, and then you don't need as many fires.
Question also about Yom Tov. So let's say Rosh Hashanah this year is Monday, Monday night also, right?
Sunday night and Monday night, yes.
So Sunday night, everything's prepared obviously beforehand. But let's say Monday night, so I cannot cook during the day Monday.
On Yom Tov, we cannot cook for the next day, even if next day is Yom Tov, but I cannot prepare for one Yom Tov to the next Yom Tov. The only time it's permitted is about 25 minutes after sunset. You can start preparing for the next day, unless you're accepting the next Yom Tov early. We are allowed to accept the next day Yom Tov earlier by lighting the candles earlier and having the meal earlier. So, for example, it's not so common, but if you can find such a minyan that prays like on Shabbat, early Shabbat, they pray on Yom Tov early, both Mincha and Arvit, and they come home while it's still daytime, before Shkia. So from the moment you light candles and you accept Yom Tov for you, and from the moment the man, pray Arvit, for them it's the next day already. And you can already prepare for the next day. But under normal circumstances, you have to wait about 25 minutes after sunset to prepare for the next day. So that's another reason why it's good to pre-cook food before Yom Tov. You make your life easier that way. Okay, so again, Shabbat, we cannot cook, we cannot raise flame, we cannot lower flame. On Yom Tov we can cook, and therefore we can raise flame and lower flame if the food needs it. But we cannot, under normal circumstances, turn off the flame unless we do a trick. We cause the fire to go out by boiling water over it and then turning off the flame.
So you said it's important to use that water that was boiling.
And then you have to, yes, you have to use that water, because you can only warm up water on Yom Tov if you need it for drink or for washing.
If, let's say on Monday on Yom Tov, I want to make fried fish, let's say, but I'm going to eat it Monday during the day. Obviously, I'm going to have some leftover for
Yeah.
Monday night. Is that allowed?
You should not specifically increase the portion of the food you're making. But if you're making it early enough, and there is a chance that maybe your family is going to be hungry, or maybe you'll have guests and they're going to eat it, then you can do it because you potentially are preparing for that day. But you shouldn't have specific intent that I'm doing it for the next day. Okay.
Also, on Yom Tov, you cannot prepare for the next Yom Tov.
Yes, on Yom Tov we cannot prepare for next Yom Tov and not for the weekday. Next is what's called a Torah prohibition of boneh, building, and a rabbinic prohibition of nolad or molid, of creating something new, as it applies to food. Are we allowed to make ice cubes on Shabbat? Seemingly, making ice cubes is creating something new. I take liquid and I turn it into solid. I take something that doesn't have shape and I give it specific shape. So, since you're not doing it with your hands, but rather it happens by itself, we are allowed to fill up a tray with water and put it in a freezer. But only if you're planning to use it on Shabbat. For example, on Shabbat, you used up all your ice cubes and you say, oh, let me fill them up again so that later tonight or tomorrow, which is going to be already Motzei Shabbat or Sunday, we're going to have ice. Then I'm not allowed to fill up the tray. With I cannot fill up the tray with water to freeze it, because I'm only planning to use the ice cubes the next day.
So you could.
But to use it on Shabbat, I can. since I'm not allowed to prepare on Shabbat for a weekday, if it's hot and I really need it and I'm out of ice, I can make ice cubes on Shabbat. Ashkenazim are more strict about it. Sephardim are more lenient. However, of course, it's preferable to prepare ice before Shabbat. And what about melting ice? So just like I can make ice from water, I can melt ice because it happens by itself. For example, I can put ice into my drink and it's going to melt by itself. However, I cannot crush ice because as I'm crushing the ice, it causes it to melt faster. And therefore, I can take the ice cubes from the freezer, I can separate them from the tray, I can put them wherever I want, but afterwards I cannot shake it and I cannot crush it.
I have a question. Is it true that if my freezer has an ice maker, that I'm not allowed to leave that option on for Shabbat?
The problem with automatic ice maker is that as soon as you take some ice out, it feels that it needs to make more ice, and just like using hot water on Shabbat, as soon as you open hot water faucet, the pressure in the boiler goes down because now there's less water, and that causes cold water to go into the boiler, and you're causing the cooking of that water.
Okay.
So here also, you're directly, by taking the ice out, you're causing that lever to go down and produce more ice. The motor starts working, and therefore, preferably you should not use it unless you hear it's making ice anyway. So if you turn that feature off, either you put something under that lever to keep it always high, and even though the ice is decreasing, it doesn't feel it because it's always up, then you're allowed to.
The fridge, every time we open and close the door, doesn't it automatically start cooling off? So isn't it the same?
So with the fridge, it is possible that when I open the door, the warm air is going to go in and it's going to turn on the motor. But because it's not for sure, it could be when I'm going to close it only after a few minutes, then it's going to turn on. Therefore, Sephardim are lenient and we allow you to open the refrigerator or freezer anytime you want because it's not for sure. Ashkenazim, some of them are strict and they wait to hear the motor. Once the motor is on, then they open the refrigerator or freezer because the motor is already on. Even if the warm air goes in, it doesn't cause the motor to turn on. It just causes it to continue working, and that's okay. But again, according to Sephardim, you can be strict, but you don't have to. And one more example of creation, of molid. Am I allowed to use whipped cream, the thing that you press and it shoots out the whipped cream, to decorate a cake or ice cream? Or am I creating in the bottle, in that container, it's pressurized liquid. When I press the button, it's going to release the pressure and it's going to fly out as a puff, as a foam. Is that permitted?
You're allowed to spray.
Spraying, it's liquid inside and it's liquid outside. I'm just spraying the water, but it stays water. Just tiny droplets of water. Here, I'm taking liquid and I'm turning it into foam, which now...
With water, you turn into ice.
Yeah, but that happens by itself. With time, you put it in and then an hour later it turns into ice. Here, by pressing that button, you cause it to fly out and turn into foam. And similarly, can I use a soap dispenser that turns the liquid soap into foam? So Ashkenazim are strict about it, they don't allow it. But Sephardim are permitted to use such things.
The soap too?
Both the soap and the whipped cream we can use on Shabbat. With this, I'm going to stop the new material. If you have questions, you may ask. Yes?
Go back to the whole Yom Tov thing. So if it's Monday, and I have guests Monday night, I cannot prepare Monday afternoon for Monday night.
On the first day of Yom Tov, you cannot prepare for the second day of Yom Tov. Because according to Torah, there is only one day of Yom Tov. The second day of Yom Tov is really a weekday according to Torah. So by preparing on the first day for the second, I am actually preparing on Yom Tov for weekday. And even if it doesn't involve work, I'm not cooking, I'm not turning the fire on, I'm just moving chairs, I'm just cleaning up, I'm just setting the table, even that is not allowed.
So if I have people coming at 8, and let's say sunset at, I don't know, like 7:30, I have to wait until 7:30?
You have to wait until 7:55. Now you don't have to worry because sunset is 6:40 on Rosh Hashanah. So you only have to wait until 7:05. You still have 55 minutes
And
to
then at
prepare.
7:05 I can start cooking?
You can do everything at that time. Yeah.
So that's okay.
Yes, of course. It says
Some dishes don't taste good when you.
Yeah, it's not the
Like they
same.
try to make food.
yes, whatever you can prepare. Certain things freeze well. Certain things even in the refrigerator they're well. Nobody's gonna know that you made it a week ago,
Yeah, but then you
6
have
months
so
ago.
many hot plates and you can't turn on the oven to heat it up. I'm not gonna put glass dish that's it's in on
Yes,
the stove
yes,
on fire.
yes.
Think it through.
You have to be, use your imagination
Can I
how
put it on
to
a hot plate
figure.
during the day for the nighttime?
No. Any preparation, any
What if
preparation,
I use some of it during the meal?
if
Put the whole thing out
you
and warm it up.
plan to use it on Yom Tov itself, and the remainder, whatever is left, you're going to use the next day, that's okay.
So that's a good one. Hold on.
But
So
you
if I
cannot
have a
on
big
purpose,
dish-
you cannot on purpose trick the system and say, I'm going to add more pieces.
Let's say I have a big dish, right, of whatever food I prepared. I can put it on the hot plate in the morning, because I know the kids and I will eat it, let's say, in the afternoon.
Yes.
Even though we're going to eat like
That's
this much.
okay. Yes, that's okay
I
to
can continue
put the
leaving it
whole
on the hot
pot
plate.
on a flame because I need it now. I don't want to separate into a different pot, warm it up. I can put the whole pot
Okay,
on.
so there is a way.
Of course.
There is a way.
You have to think about it. You have to prepare in advance. It says, Eizehu hacham haroet hanolad. Who is a wise man? One who foresees the future. And therefore, if you know that a situation is going to arise, prepare for it by buying certain equipment, utensils, by adjusting your habits, not to cook everything on the day, preparing, even if it's not so delicious. It's better to keep the laws properly than to
And
I'm
if
so cold. I have so many people coming. I have like over 20 people coming. I cannot cook for 2 nights
in one day.
Like it's
why not?
gonna happen.
Cook this much.
What are you gonna? What's behind dish you're gonna make this? You're gonna freeze. Just give me ideas.
For
Put it in the freezer.
to make what?
Okay.
Oh yes, yes. No, you can. No. Anything you freeze raw is fine. You can make gosh gija and freeze it before baking. Mante, pelmeni, you can freeze it before baking,
But
before
how are you
cooking.
gonna turn on the oven, Rabbi? You can't turn on
Some
the
people
oven.
keep the oven on.
You can, yes. You can either keep the oven on,
That's a habit.
or mante, you don't need oven. Pelmeni, you don't need oven. You can make roast. You can make tongue. You can make different kinds of meat, and meat freezes very well. Nobody is ever gonna know that it wasn't roasted today.
They're gonna know.
Some are pretty good about it.
They're gonna know.
You could just cut fresh onions and
Finishing
but
touch.
the meat is ready from before.
Yeah, you can make both of them. Just do the cutting before and then
It's
put
not
it
the
together.
same.
No, the cutting, the dicing and chopping and then
Yeah,
put
but then
it
you gotta
together.
cook it.
Right, you can
Yeah,
actually
you can cook
cut.
It, you can cook it
It
right
takes
after.
a long
No, you
You're
can,
gonna eat it right
for
away.
example, you can prepare meat, the right size. You can cut up carrots and
That's
freeze
not the
them.
problem. The actual cooking process is the problem.
It can take you more than an hour.
If you start it right after.
Right, especially since we don't start our meals with the main course. By the time they sing, by the time they make kiddush, by the time they wash, by the time they eat
But you tell me
bread
I
and
cannot set up my
fish.
table. I cannot clean.
Yes.
Start cooking.
Yes, that is why we rely on our children, on our spouses, on our guests.
My husband is in shul.
As soon as he comes, as soon as he
my
comes,
guests are gonna come to a dirty table.
no dirty table.
You said I can't clean the table.
So-
After your meal, you can clean.
If
Yeah.
if you are in a room
Okay.
and it bothers you, the dirt, I can remove all the dirt and clean because I'm doing it for now. Now I want to feel. Yeah, you can put them straight,
Only if you're in the
but
room.
you cannot bring new chairs from the basement because you don't need them now. They're not bothering you in the basement.
I'm not in the sukkah because I'm talking about sukkot, right? I'm not in the sukkah, so it's not really bothering me unless I go in there.
Yes, sukkah is a different law in your favor that we have to keep sukkah clean, and therefore you can clean the table in a sukkah. But to put new plates, you cannot. To bring new chairs from outside, you cannot until 25 minutes after
Okay.
sunset.
Okay. Right. Going back to Yom Tov. Let's
Yes.
say Monday. Monday afternoon we eat. I can clean the table. I cannot.
You can
set
clean
up
the
Monday.
table if you are in that room and it bothers you.
What if I'm
If
not
after
in
you eat, you don't go in until the nighttime.
there? No, I'm gonna keep going in and out.
So again, either you or your children or your husband, if they are in that room and they want to use the table or they're just resting on the couch and just doesn't look nice, you can clean because it's to make Yom Tov more honorable, to create a clean, festive atmosphere.
Okay.
That's permitted. You can sweep the floor, you can clean the table. We're talking about setting up for the next meal. Cleaning up is for now. Setting up is for the next meal. Okay. Shabbat Shalom, Chag Sameach, Shana Tova Metuka, Ktiva v'Chatima Tova.